When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt arrived in England in early 1943, it looked like an unstoppable war machine. It was massive, heavily armed with 8 50-caliber machine guns, and powered by a supercharged 2,000-horsepower engine that made it one of the fastest, toughest fighters in the sky. American pilots stepping into those cavernous cockpits for the first time felt invincible, certain they were flying the most advanced fighter ever built. But the war had a brutal way of humbling even the most confident men. On April 15, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group flew its first combat mission over occupied Europe. Within minutes of crossing the Dutch coast, German Focke-Wulf 190s appeared, diving on them with precision and deadly skill. When the American pilots tried to turn and fight in the traditional sense, the Thunderbolts wallowed through the air, bleeding speed, while the lighter German fighters danced around them with ease. 4 P-47s were shot down without a single German loss. It wasn't a lack of courage or training. These men were skilled, disciplined, and eager. But physics doesn't bend for bravery. The P-47, weighing over 17,000 pounds fully loaded, was nearly twice as heavy as its opponents. It simply couldn't turn with them. Through the spring of 1943, losses mounted. The Luftwaffe cut through Thunderbolt formations as American pilots tried to fight like they were in nimble Spitfires. Morale collapsed, and many believed the P-47 was a catastrophic mistake. German pilots bragged in their diaries that shooting down Thunderbolts was easy, because the Americans kept trying to turn and chase. On returning bases, ground crews saw aircraft riddled with holes from stern attacks, evidence that the Germans were comfortably sitting on their tails. The P-47 could take punishment and bring its pilots home, but it wasn't winning. The 8th Air Force couldn't sustain those losses. The bombers needed real escorts, not just survivors. Then, by sheer observation and necessity, pilots began to discover the secret hidden within the Thunderbolt's weight. Lieutenant Quentin Brown of the 78th Fighter Group noticed something odd in June 1943. After losing a turning fight with Messerschmitts, he dove away to escape and suddenly found himself accelerating faster than anything chasing him. The Germans broke off. That moment changed everything. The Thunderbolt's mass, which made it a brick in turns, became its greatest strength in dives. It converted altitude into speed with terrifying efficiency. In a dive, a P-47 could hit 550 miles per hour, far beyond what German fighters could sustain without tearing themselves apart. What began as a desperate escape maneuver turned into a revolutionary new way to fight. Pilots who learned to use the Thunderbolt's weight as an advantage, diving hard, attacking fast, and climbing back to altitude, began surviving and winning. This idea evolved into what became known as energy tactics, where altitude and speed replaced tight turns as the true weapons of aerial warfare. But it took leadership to turn those scattered observations into doctrine. When Colonel Hub Zemke took command of the 56th Fighter Group in August 1943, he brought analytical precision that bordered on obsession. He studied loss reports, interviewed surviving pilots, and noticed an unmistakable pattern. Those who climbed high, attacked in steep dives, and refused to turn fight were the ones coming back alive. So he threw out the Air Force's official tactics manual, a move that could have ended his career if it failed, and replaced it with something radical. Never turn with the enemy. Under Zemke's doctrine, Thunderbolt pilots would climb to 30,000 feet, dive at blistering speed, fire during the pass, and climb away before the enemy could react. No chasing, no circling, no hesitation. Some called it cowardly. Zemke's response was blunt. Dead heroes don't win wars. Live pilots who kill the enemy do. On October 8, 1943, the 56th Fighter Group tested the new tactics over Bremen. From 32,000 feet, they dove like thunderbolts from the heavens, aptly named, and smashed through German formations at 450 miles per hour. 8 kills, no losses. The effect was electric. Suddenly, the same aircraft that had been mocked as clumsy and useless became a terror in the skies. Pilots who once dreaded combat now sought it, knowing they held the advantage. The Luftwaffe didn't know how to counter it. When the Thunderbolts dove, German formations shattered. Veterans who had fought over Britain and Stalingrad described the attacks as psychological warfare at 450 miles per hour. You couldn't outclimb or outdive them. You could only scatter and pray. Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler recorded in his diary the chaos when Thunderbolts fell on his formation. Radios filled with panicked shouts, squadrons broke apart, and within seconds, 2 of his comrades were gone. The Americans didn't stay to dogfight. They were already climbing away to strike again. Between late 1943 and early 1944, the kill ratios told the story better than any report could. Before Zemke's tactics, the 56th barely broke even in combat. 4 months later, they were destroying nearly 5 German fighters for every Thunderbolt lost. During Big Week in February 1944, the 56th claimed 82 kills in 7 days, losing only 11 aircraft. Pilots like Robert Johnson and Gerald Johnson became legends, not because they were aces born with superior reflexes, but because they followed doctrine with machine-like precision. Climb high, dive fast, fire once, climb again. The data was undeniable. Other groups like the 78th, who resisted the doctrine and kept dogfighting, suffered heavy losses until they finally adopted the same methods. Once they did, their effectiveness tripled. The 56th's coordination evolved too. Flights began diving in sequence from staggered altitudes, one after another, keeping German formations under constant pressure. Radio discipline became strict. Pilots learned to make their single 3-second burst count. 8 50 cals firing 40 rounds a second could tear through a fighter in one pass. By summer 1944, P-47 groups weren't just winning dogfights, they were saving bombers. Where once B-17s had been slaughtered in daylight raids, losses now dropped from over 50% to less than 2%. The Luftwaffe couldn't adapt. Climb higher, and their engines failed in the thin air. Stay lower, and they were easy prey. Fighter units disintegrated, morale collapsed, and by the end of 1944, Germany's air defense was breaking apart faster than it could be replaced. The success spread by word of mouth more than by official training manuals. Pilots returning from missions told new arrivals, "Altitude is life. Speed is a weapon. Never turn with the enemy." New units like the 352nd Fighter Group trained with dive attack tactics from day one and saw 5.1 kill ratios in their first month. By 1944, the method was universal across the 8th Air Force and later across all Allied air forces. The doctrine even transcended aircraft. P-51 Mustangs and P-38 Lightnings adopted modified versions suited to their designs, proving the principle was universal. Fight to your aircraft's strengths, never to your enemies. The revolution born in 1943 carried into the jet age. In Korea, F-86 Sabres used the same vertical energy tactics to defeat MiG-15s, achieving 10.1 kill ratios, not because they were faster, but because American pilots knew how to control speed and altitude like currency. In Vietnam, when early F-4 Phantom crews struggled against lighter MiGs, it was the rediscovery of these same principles, codified by Colonel John Boyd into energy maneuverability theory, that turned the tide. Boyd's famous Udier loop, observe, orient, decide, act, was built on lessons first proven by the P-47 in Europe. From the heavy Thunderbolt to the agile F-15, the physics never changed. Altitude became energy, energy became speed, and speed dictated who lived and who died. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt isn't just the tale of a plane that went from failure to dominance, it's the story of human adaptation, of pilots and commanders who refused to accept doctrine that didn't work, who learned through fire and loss that survival depended not on courage alone, but on understanding the physics of flight itself. Hub Zemke and his men didn't just save the 8th Air Force, they rewrote the rulebook of air combat. Their legacy endures every time a modern fighter pilot climbs high, dives fast, and remembers that in the sky, energy, not turning, wins wars.